Great. So the background to this project is obviously that in 2020, London Sport and our core East London partners, so the West End Foundation, Leyton Orient Trust, Essex Cricket, Sport England and Pulse Netball all came together to develop and test a hyperlocal whole systems approach to developing evidence for physical activity programming and intervention development to be done in a collaborative manner. This was to be delivered by London Sport Consultancy. We then partnered with AudienceNet due to their expertise and background in working with less heard communities and also from a cultural insights perspective. So for those of you who aren't familiar, London Sport exists to make London the most physically active city in the world. And we are supported by Sport England and the Mayor of London and work in partnership with London's local authorities and a host of agencies to support less active Londoners to build physical activity habits that support their health, well-being and prosperity. The aim of this particular piece of research was to change how physical activity and sport is perceived, delivered and led by East London, women in East London, and focusing on the role of local influencers. So that is people, places or platforms or any particular element or factor that could be considered a influencer to reach and engage less active women in physical activity and sport. And as I mentioned, the purpose of this was to pilot and test a hyperlocal and collaborative whole systems approach, which would develop evidence for physical activity programming and community sports development. Obviously with a focus on diverse communities and populations where we know activity levels are below average. And so there's two main parts to this project. There's obviously the research element, which we're talking through today. And then there's the implementation, the collaboration and the activation element, which we'll get to later on, and which is very much done in partnership with these organizations that I've mentioned already. So the wider purpose and rationale behind this was that we wanted to localize London Sport's existing less active segmentation research. And for those of you who aren't familiar, London Sport undertook a major research project a couple of years ago, which looked at segmenting less active communities across London. And we developed 7 segments, which included understanding of the behaviours, their propensity to be moved along a behaviour change approach into physical activity, as well as kind of key factors that would drive their motivation. So this very much builds on that research, and it applies it in a much more localized approach. So taking what we know already and then looking to understand more at a local or a hyper-local level. And this was obviously, as I mentioned, to fit in with the collaborative whole systems approach to developing evidence for physical activity programming and community sports development, but also in a way that is not only applicable to this particular area, but that it is scalable at other geographies and across other communities. We really wanted to understand more about the reach, engagement and communication aspects required to apply Sport England's behaviour change model. So this is something that we felt within London and at a local level there was a particular gap around, and obviously this research and the outputs that have come out of it will hopefully fill that gap and develop an approach for this particular community, but one that can be applied to other communities as well. We very much wanted to produce research outputs that are user-friendly and actionable for a core partner group, so supporting them to put them in place and really test and find out whether they're working for them. Is this going to result in increased activity levels amongst women and girls in East London, and continue that collaboration and that kind of development and of understanding, so they know what is and what isn't working, and how we can continuously improve the research as we go forward into implementation. And then finally, we wanted to influence policy and decision making around strategic planning and investment in the physical activity and sports sector. So using this research again as a tool to develop and support other kind of projects and pilot and test this particular approach to localized community activation. So this is very much fitting into a number of different purposes for London Sport. At this point, I'm going to pass you on now to the much more interesting part of the research, part of this presentation, which is Sanya Hack from AudienceNet, who'll talk through the methodology.
Thank you, Tristan. Yes, the methodology, hopefully we have some methodology buffs in the audience. So I'll take you through this quickly, and then Laura Jane will take us through like kind of the insights, the really, really exciting stuff. So great to be on with all of you. Thank you, Tristan, for providing the background and stuff. And yeah, just to say, this is a project that we at AudienceNet are really passionate about. It's kind of a dream team for us to work with London Sport on this. As Tristan mentioned, we work a lot with lesser heard groups, particularly the sort of diverse populations in the UK especially. It's an area that I specialise in a lot. So on top of that, also we have quite a lot of experience within sports and well-being generally. So we've worked with big brands and worked with various governing bodies and sporting men and stuff in the past as well. I also work quite on the ground with a dance company. So yeah, it's just an area that we're really, really passionate about. So we developed a multi-stage approach. So the first stage of which was just sharing our collective knowledge together with London Sport. Then stage 2 was where we really wanted to inform what we did with data and make sure that it was kind of robust in terms of who we were including, because the bulk of what we did was qualitative. So we did a big desk research and data triangulation where we looked at different data sets to essentially sort of stress test some of our assumptions and some of our knowledge to make sure we had the right people in that kind of smaller relative to quant, but it was a very in-depth engagement with 64 participants. So we wanted to be sure that it was as representative as we could get it. So that then made up the third stage of our process. So we spent 2 weeks in an online community with 64 participants who sort of reflected the area, which I'll come on to in a bit. But this was during a sort of late last year. So we were still in a form of a lockdown, and as we started, a lot of the gyms were then shut again. So there were tasks that we did with people where we kind of asked them to look into different activities that they would do. So there were some things that they couldn't just because of restrictions, but there's still a lot of insight into the things that they're attracted to and stuff. So we made sure it was kind of sort of effectively, dare I say, COVID proofed. And then there was a last element to the qualitative phase, which was an influencer consultation, which some of you helped us with and took part in. And as Tristan said, it's about action. So, you know, how can we work with people in the area to make sure this is led by women and girls and, you know, those beneficiaries that we're trying to target? Which leads us on to stage 4. We've finished all the reporting now, and all the deliverables are ready for you guys to look through, and there's various different things, and Laura Jane will show us as well, that hopefully are easy to action. And you know, so yeah, we'll take you through those shortly. And now, yeah, this is part of our implementation strategy, where we'll run webinars, do various other strategies to help get the word out and help us kind of, yeah, make a difference here. So if we go on to the next slide, so this is sort of how we went about our recruitment. And as I mentioned, it was informed by various different data sets. So the first one here on the left is what we know about levels of inactivity across the area, the darker red areas being the least active. And if we actually look at the middle diagram, so that's the distribution of the ethnic minority population. And what we know about is the areas we were looking at are highly diverse in terms of ethnicity, but what we can see is that actually some of the darker red areas tend to correlate more with areas that are majority white populations. So we realized from this that actually it wasn't just the minority ethnic groups that we needed to include or we wanted to focus on. We would actually want to include some white British groups as well to understand the barriers they face. So that was a really, really critical piece of information. So it was important that we included them in. We also looked at a range of other variables, and here's just one. So it's proximity to green space, which sort of helping us understand the whole systems approach. If we can make a change, you know, what do people have access to that we can kind of lead them towards? Is it parks, etc.? So it was this. We had a range of other variables as well, but just to give you some insight of what we did there. The next slide here is just something that we were really, really overwhelmed with. really pleased with, because research with lesser heard groups or diverse populations is more challenging in that you can't necessarily go through mainstream research processes or methods. It can be more niche, I guess, quote unquote, so more of an active effort needs to be made, and you can absolutely reach them if you do that. And so this is sort of something that we feel this research really showcased, that we had over 500 women respond to us, women and girls, within a sort of week and a half period, expressing their interest in taking part in this research. So we're really proud of that, and we're hopeful, as Tristan said, to in future hopefully roll this out to different areas and use a similar kind of grassroots approach to that, as well as our digital marketing campaigns and our own personal networks. So really pleased with that. We're hoping that a lot of them will help us as well, so if we re-engage them when it comes to the delivery of things as well. So yes, that's a little bit about the kind of how we went about this, and Laura Jane, I'll hand over to you to take us through the findings.
Great. Hi, everyone. So my name's Laura Jane, working with Sanya at AudienceNet, and I'll take you through some of the key findings, first of what we found from the online community, and then a little bit more about our outputs. So if we start off with some of the key findings, just to say this is a very top level view, and if you look in that link, which I believe might have been sent out along with the invite to this webinar, you'll be able to find the full report, or at least we might be able to link to it later. You'll be able to find the full report with the full findings in there. But just to give you an overview, we really wanted to sort of understand the local context, because obviously we know that this area of London in particular sees very low levels of activity, not just throughout London, but also, on a sort of national level. So we really want to understand more here. So in terms of the barriers to physical activity that women told us about in this sort of local context, there were really quite a few major concerns about safety while exercising. So this was, for example, people, women in particular, not feeling that comfortable exercising in open spaces if it was by themselves or later into the evening. So as you can imagine, that sort of limited them in terms of when and where they were actually able to exercise. Something which also came up was a lack of female-only spaces to exercise in. So even if there were a few female-only gyms, etc., it just turned out that our sample, weren't aware of those places. And so even those women who might have wanted to do a little more exercise in the first place didn't necessarily always have the means to, because they didn't quite feel comfortable in the spaces they had. Other common barriers were, of course, sort of, as you might expect, a lack of financial resources. So a few women said to us that they would actually like to take part in gym classes, have thought about gym memberships, but simply the cost of these can really create a prohibitive barrier to them. And then there were also the more sort of mental barriers, I suppose, if you like. So fears of being judged and feeling underconfident around physical activity and just turning up to places to try out a new activity. So imagine really the context of these less active women, just even if they want to try things out, they feel underconfident already going into those situations. What also became clear was that certain groups faced specific barriers to their cohort. So one of these to pick out is definitely mothers, who we heard a lot from and a lot about. So this can be in terms of, financial barriers, having just started a family, or the lack of childcare provisions at places where you can exercise, which just generally sort of culminated in quite a few different barriers to them starting in exercise. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail later on. We also looked at the type of communications which might help to, first of all, engage the less active women in this area, and then look at actually enabling them to start more exercise. But what was clear as in sort of overall learning was that participants really, in any form of comms or campaigns, wanted to see inclusive depictions of women. So obviously a focus for this often is, a broad range of ethnicities, different cultures, different heritages. But what women also made clear to us as well was they'd like to see a real sort of good depiction of diverse body types as well, so that they were still, they said, quite used to seeing, perhaps women on the skinnier side in these sort of gym posters, etc., and that they'd really like to see what they called women like them, i.e. a breadth of different body types presented as well. In terms of messages which this cohort thought could help engage them, we put this to them, and what, imagined you were creating an exercise campaign, what would you say? A lot of women said that they would focus on the health benefits of exercise, and that within this particular, they will also focus on the mental health benefits. female empowerment through exercise. So notions of sisterhood, finding that inner strength, narratives about the fact that yes, women do have a lot to juggle, but you can do this, do something for yourself. A little similar to, if we're all familiar with This Girl Can, which was tested actually in this community, and people generally responded really well to. So those kinds of narratives definitely work well. And then also positioning exercise as fun and sociable. So this was really key and came out in a lot of women's answers. So as opposed to, maybe thinking about exercise or sport as one of these sort of more competitive or highly pressured environments, it meant a lot to these women to say that actually, no, you can just do this for a bit of fun, more casually, and promote exercise more along those lines. In terms of preferred activities and exercise sessions, which we asked women about, it's important just to bear in mind that for quite a few participants, they did prefer solo activities, because they could do these sort of at their own pace with not too much pressure of a group scenario. So things like jogging or swimming. But I suppose with the facilitators that we have, obviously you guys on this webinar, perhaps group settings might be a little more relevant. But so the key things here were just, about putting or promoting group settings as sort of relaxed and sociable group activities or environments. So for example, Zumba did quite well, walking groups, dance classes, all of these group activities, which again, just feel a bit more fun and sociable and less sort of high pressured or less formal, performed really well. So a few people just thought that these spaces just felt a little less intimidating and more engaging to them. And then as we've already said, we tried to, with this research, really angle the research around influencers. So local organizations or individuals on the ground who could hold sway over women and sort of encourage them, inspire them, and enable them to take up more exercise. So what was interesting was that most did cite actually friends and family as those with the most potential to influence them in regards to exercise. This was because they felt that these were the people who knew them best, who they trusted, who felt they had their best interests at heart. But of course, from an intervention point of view, friends and family are not the easiest group to sort of target. So when it comes to sort of the kinds of organizations we'd be looking at, it was sort of really places of worship, parenting groups, and sports clubs particularly seem to be really important organizational influences. And this is because they either just held a lot of influence amongst women. So for example, places of worship, faith was quite important to a lot of women in the area. But also they had sort of the potential to facilitate sessions in safe spaces. So if you think of parenting groups, for example, a ready network of mothers to engage with the potential, perhaps with the right, help to facilitate sessions there and then. So almost two birds with one stone, if you like. So we'll dig into this all a little bit further. So here, as you can see, after the online community and those initial thoughts from women about the influencers who might be best positioned to sort of inspire and enable them, we then, as we've already previously said, went and did extra influencer consultations. I know we've got a few on the call, so thank you very much. They were really, really helpful conversations. And what we started to do was map different forms of influencers onto this, what we're calling sphere of influence. So both by impact and by reach. And the important thing to say, mostly just with this scale, is that it doesn't really matter where influencers are plotted. For example, parenting groups might have a slightly lower reach just simply because not every woman is going to have children the age which is appropriate for parenting groups. However, we know that loads of those women really crave exercise, and the impact that parenting groups could have is incredibly high. So I think the main thing that we're coming away from this exercise with is just the idea of sort of partnership between different influencers. So for example, maybe sports clubs facilitating parenting groups with certain facilities or sports programs, etc., and seeing how we can sort of create a network on the ground, where we create these partnerships and create those kinds of interventions within the network. So this is where we're going to take you through a few of the outputs which we've created, particularly focusing on the segmentation and participant journeys. And before we delve into those, just to say that we did create quite a wide range of outputs here. We do have, as I've mentioned before, that full findings report to give you just all the detail that came out of the online community, with a few verbatim quotes as well to really bring that to life. But then what we're going to concentrate on really in terms of the rollout is a partner guidance pack, which we created so that, you know, delivery bodies such as yourselves on the ground could reach to these kinds of tools and then maybe identify, you know, particular segments that you might want to target, as well as, you know, if it working with other influencers in our networks or in the local community. We're hoping that this toolkit will really allow you to be able to do that. So we created segmentation and with personas. We have participant journeys on the back of those, which sort of illustrate the journey that each segment would go through in order to get to sustainable activity. And then we also have influencer case studies, which just lay out how best to work with various influencers around the area. So we'll start off with the segmentation. These are quite dense, so do please feel free to look through them in your own time. But we'll run through them briefly now. Just to say, so there are 4 segments, and within each segment, there will also be 2 supporting personas. We haven't put them all in this presentation, of course, because it would just be a bit too much to run through, but just for your information, for each segmentation, there is just that extra nuance by way of 2 personas. So the first segment is digitally focused. This segment is highly connected digitally and influenced by what they see on social media. We're suggesting that this is about 50% of the population, because while this segment does tend to skew, you know, younger, as you might imagine, it does of course include women from all other age groups who might be active online. So there's a wide range of women who could really benefit from some of these interventions. But coming back to this sort of main cohort who are slightly younger, we've in each of these segments even, set out considerations around exercise, which is similar to sort of, you know, potential barriers around exercise, the most impactful influences and channels which could reach them, and then also just some thoughts about most relevant physical activities and sessions for them. So this cohort being a bit younger, so under the considerations around exercise, many do have school, college or uni work to contend with for their time. And then also at this younger age, social life and fitting in is extremely important to women. So, you know, we did get the impression that the more that girls saw other friends and other women doing exercise, the more they might be encouraged to do so as well. So this leads nicely into sort of the most impactful influencers and channels. So Instagram influencers we saw have a real potential to influence this cohort. This is a lot of the content that they see. And I guess the opportunity here really is that if there are any local influencers, you know, so any contacts people might have who are either sports related, or even if they're not sports related influencers, but could or would be willing to talk about this subject on a local level, we feel like there could be a real opportunity here. Sports clubs as well, who create a bit more of a social media presence, so who might, you know, create inspiring content with posts or pictures and other engaging content, could do really well to engage those cohorts. So whether that is also, you know, advertising beginners sessions on their social media or posting pictures so girls have a bit more of an impression of what it's going to be like, that could all really help. Then when it comes to relevant physical activities and sessions, we found that really there aren't too many barriers around physical activity sessions for this cohort. We heard from a lot of younger women that they were really keen actually to try everything from, I suppose, the more traditional sports such as netball, basketball, etc., to new things such as rock climbing, kickboxing, dance classes, yoga. So really there's a big opportunity with this cohort to engage them in all kinds of physical activity. And just to say, obviously, you would then have 2 personas, which go into a bit more detail underneath that segment. But to come to our second segment, busy mothers, these are women who are raising children of any age and whose role as mother plays a dominant role in their lives and greatly impacts their free time. So here, considerations around exercise. We know that mothers, obviously, and this is what we heard as well, have little to no spare time to themselves in order to exercise. The majority can also be financially stretched, having just started a family, and gym memberships and other, you know, exercise-related costs can create prohibitive barriers. And also, a big one we heard about was that without some form of childcare on site, many are unable to attend those sports clubs or gyms anyway, as they're not able to pay for that independent childcare outside of what they already have. So in terms of most impactful influences and channels, parenting groups obviously already provide a lot of support for women. They also potentially have the space to engage their networks in you know, activities of their choosing, if they're able to find the funding for that, etc., which again we'll come back to. Local WhatsApp groups, we know that mothers in particular have really well established WhatsApp groups through which they can actually pass on the word about, new initiatives or new programs. And then if relevant, not all mothers might be religious, but for those who are, again, churches, mosques, temples are all places which these women would then already be familiar with, and usually also, might offer some form of childcare as well. So if those religious establishments are able to offer some form of activities, again, that would be a safe space, one that people are familiar with, and one that people might be more open to exercising in. They are currently the most sort of limited segment in terms of being able to exercise, just simply because of their role as a mother. However, we heard from many women that they are really, really keen to have some time for themselves, to let off some steam, which they're just not usually able to do if they've got one or more kids. So activities ranging from the relaxing, such as yoga or Pilates, to also, importantly, the higher intensity fitness classes, as well as some sort of family sports sessions or activity-based games for mothers and children, would really help this segment. We heard from mothers that they're really calling out for some sort of physical activity opportunities. Segment 3 is religiously oriented. So this is a segment for who they just, their religious leaders or their religious establishments do hold influence in their lives, and they attach great significance to their religion and their spiritual beliefs. So from the last census data, we saw that the population who identify as religious is really quite high. We understand that obviously some people, not everyone will be practicing, but we do think that, if especially religious establishments are able to expand to networks beyond their usual congregation, we do think they'd be able to interact with a quite high percentage of women in the area. So in terms of considerations around exercise, this is all very dependent on faith and religion, but according to religious practices, many may not feel comfortable exercising in mixed spaces. So they require female-only spaces, of which currently they either don't know about any, or there are just very few in the area. So this is already a sort of barrier. Some may also feel constraints around their beliefs and preferences about clothing and appropriate kit to exercise in. So this can be another barrier if they just don't feel that they're able to sort of, join in with the clothes they feel more comfortable wearing. Obviously, in terms of the most impactful influences, religious places of worship really are the key one here. So not only, can they actually spread the positive messages and the sort of, greater education, perhaps, even though we know that women are very educated already on the importance of exercise, but, really sort of condoning, encouraging women to pick up exercise, also maybe from a spiritual point of view, however they want to do that, but also offering exercise sessions on site. So we spoke to, for example, Barking Mosque, who are already offering a whole plethora of exercise opportunities and are seeing a really high footfall, so a really successful program there. Also sports clubs who can cater towards cultural considerations around clothing and also provide female coaches, female-only sessions, obviously would really help here. In terms of relevant physical activities, this really can be a whole range. The only thing we thought, obviously, from the conversations that we had, were that some types of activities, such as dance or netball, may prove more challenging to introduce to certain communities. However, efforts to do so should really still be made because it's fully worth it. And there are obviously just sensitive ways of introducing different sports to different communities. Segment 4 is our community fixtures. So these are women who, rather than being influenced by social media, are more sort of staples of the area, tapped into their traditional media. So, radio, newspapers, word of mouth, interested in what's going on in their local neighborhood, their neighbors, etc. So this segment does tend to skew a little bit older. Considerations around exercise or potential barriers here might be that they are generally, if they're less on social media, where other people might be getting those incentives or the motivation to exercise by the content that they see, they might just be less exposed to that sort of content around fitness or fitness role models. So may require some greater inspiration to start exercising. And also, given that this segment does skew older, many might just feel a little uncomfortable, a little, as if they just haven't got the same fitness anymore, and therefore just walk into what might be typically seen as younger spaces such as gyms and sports clubs with a little trepidation. The most impactful influences and channels. So local channels obviously are really, really impactful for this group. So, you know, any messages about women's initiatives for women along WhatsApp groups, neighborhood apps, you know, next door, local radio stations, etc., will really help to spread the word. Sports clubs who can offer community sessions. So these are sessions which are maybe seen as less competitive, or where just anyone can turn up. So that these women are maybe able to exercise with other women from their age cohort would really be able to help here. Or councils who are able to organize, you know, sports related events in public spaces, which everyone can turn up to and maybe have more of that social factor as well, would really help. That's pretty much what we put for the relevant physical activities and sessions. So relaxed sessions, which are also more sociable, such as jogging in groups, Zumba, netball, rounder sessions would greatly appeal. However, a few obviously may have done sport in the past and just feel a little uncomfortable or underconfident about getting back to that. And that's why we think sports clubs who offer, you know, either beginners sessions or community sessions could really help out this segment here. Then this is just an example of a persona. So this is taking you back a bit to the segment 2, which is the busy mothers. We've got Roxana here. So as you can see, Roxana is just, you know, someone who encapsulates, I suppose, the experience of many mothers who we spoke to, and it's just to add a little bit more nuance to that overall segment. So for example, Roxana would like to go to the gym to keep fit, but membership feels like an unnecessary expense amongst her other priorities and slightly prohibitive. And with 2 young children, she's not able to attend anyway unless there is childcare while she exercises on the site. So the main things to pull out here really would be those opportunities to influence and enable. So as we've already said, parenting groups such as The Hug, which we spoke to, or Early Years Cocoon, both located in Barking, do every so often offer free sessions for mothers and children. So that would obviously be a great help to mothers in general. Again, the conversation is just about carrying those on longer term. Or sports clubs who can, you know, maybe provide actually some sessions, some coaches who can facilitate exercise from home, online. That would really help mothers out as well. So that's an example of the kind of, you know, a little extra detail that we've got for each segment. Then we've also created, as I said, a participant journey. So here we've got the example of the busy mothers again, just to obviously clarify, we do have these for each segment, and you can again find these through that link on the London Sport portal. As you can see, what we have moving across the top here is 3 different main stages we've identified that women go through in terms of, you know, reaching that goal of prolonged, sustained activity. Running across the top, we have the sort of journey that the woman goes on herself. Underneath, we have opportunities to influence and enable. So these are points that we've identified where influencers could step in. So for example, in awareness, at the start of the journey, many mothers, they know they should exercise more, but, you know, given various barriers we've already spoken about, and lack of time, lack of energy, and lack of information, they're just not aware of suitable opportunities for mothers in their area. So this is where we feel that parenting groups and where relevant religious institutions could come in and spread messaging about the importance of exercising through their networks of mothers. Then, however, maybe, you know, having made the decision to exercise more in the delivery stage here, we can see that actually a lot of mothers will still come up against certain barriers. So for example, financial, a lack of access to the resources necessary, logistical, not being able to leave their child alone, and also just a lack of knowledge to create their own exercise routine at home, even if they want to do so. So again, here underneath, we've obviously got a plethora of opportunities to enable and influence. So as we've said before, you know, parenting groups could offer exercise sessions for mothers and their children for free and in their own space. And so just to highlight here, another thing we've tried to put in each journey is where there is opportunity for partnership. So here we've put, you know, parenting groups and religious institutions do require support in terms of coaches and equipment, which sports clubs could then potentially help and facilitate. And then moving on to the final box here, we obviously don't want this to be a one-off, you know, for women to have certain experiences of exercising, but then the usual barriers may be holding them back again. We do want them to be able to reach sustained activity. So here, in terms of maintaining momentum, there might be certain ideas that parenting groups or sports clubs could facilitate. So for example, maybe the idea of exercise partners to keep one another accountable, motivated, or joint mother-child sessions might also help motivate more women to continue exercising if they know that not only they, but their child as well are getting some really beneficial exercise. Obviously, we also want women to spread the word to their networks, to other women like them. So we also focus on advocacy here. We know that mothers have really extensive networks. So again, if we're able to encourage them to pass on the word, then we're able just to facilitate exercise to more women in their cohort. And lastly, this is an example of some of the influencer case studies which we have now written up. So as usual, we have these for every single influencer who we spoke to, or the influencer type at least. So this is an example of parenting groups. So as you'll see here, it's essentially us running through what we feel might be the greatest needs of certain influencers, and therefore how others can work with them to create partnership, and then obviously these kinds of interventions and opportunities. So overall impact of parenting groups, we heard that there's a really high ability to inspire, and then obviously if they are able to facilitate on site, a really high chance to be able to enable. There's also quite a medium reach into mothers. We know that the birth rates in this target area are really, really high. And then also we know that the 2 parenting groups we consulted had about 100 to 200 mothers in their direct network. So already quite a big network to get started with. Potential challenges, though, are that parenting groups are very low on available funds and therefore struggle to organise any sort of long-term forms of exercise sessions or programmes. There's also an emphasis on sessions having to be free in order for it to be accessible to all mothers. So this creates another, just another consideration here at least. We do know, however, that parenting groups are really keen to be able to facilitate exercise sessions to mothers and are very open to partnership opportunities. So in terms of the greatest needs that another partner might be able to fulfill here, this would be along the lines of spaces for sessions where the mothers can bring their children, because many parenting groups don't necessarily have their own space. They might have to borrow, pay for spaces to use. So this could be a real need to work towards here. Resources for physical activity sessions. So obviously not every parenting group will be able to themselves coach a session. So coaches would be really useful, equipment and programs. And then obviously, as we've mentioned before, some way of keeping the cost really, really accessible here. In terms of ideal sessions for parenting groups, this is just really trying to take into account any children as well. So if these are mothers with children, aged 4 and above, then traditional sports such as cricket, football, which are really easy to pick up, work really well for mothers and would be really quite appealing. If depending on the age of the children, if they're younger, then also maybe just some games such as tag or throwing and catching balls work really equally well. And again, just provide that sort of joint exercise for mother and child. However, really important also that mothers do have the opportunity to exercise for themselves and by themselves, just to get a bit of alone time and spend more time with adults as well, rather than always being surrounded by their children. So things such as yoga, Pilates, Zumba, with childcare on site would really be ideal here. And in terms of examples of successful initiatives, and I believe we do have Early Years Cocoon on the call, which is great. So we heard from Early Years Cocoon that they have already partnered with Essex Cricket to deliver 30 sessions of cricket to families in their networks. We know that they received great feedback. There was really good engagement and turnout for these sessions, even in midwinter. And obviously the conversation now is just how to be able to extend that and recreate that again. But also they've created a pamphlet on easy exercise for mothers to do with their children at home, so that even during a lockdown or when they don't have as much time, they're able to keep on exercising and do something for their own sort of, physical activity, physical health at home. So as we said, this is just a run through of this particular influencer. And as you can see, we're trying to give you the tools here for maybe, segments of women you might want to target, what their journey might look like and the necessary stages in order to get there, as well as then also tools on how to engage with other sort of organizations in the area. So I will pass back over to Tristan, I believe it is, to look at the sort of how we can take this project forward in the future.
Yes, thanks, Laura Jane. Yeah, so hopefully you've got a kind of a really clear picture and understanding of what the process we went through, the methodology, the findings, and outputs, and and kind of what they mean. Now, just come back to kind of the primary purpose of the research, which was that obviously we looked to develop a really usable and user-friendly set of tools, resources, and evidence that partners can use to reach and engage less active women and girls in those particular areas. So we'll definitely be defining the success of this particular project, this research, based on the feedback we receive on how it gets implemented, and the results obviously that come out of that, working closely with our partners. The core, obviously, the core part of this then is, well, there's two sides to it. One is activation, which includes kind of promotion, dissemination, and then the implementation phase. So looking at promotion and dissemination and how we're kind of going about that. As I mentioned earlier, there will be online access to all of the research tools and resources, including the background report and methodology. And at this, following this session, I'll drop a link into the chat for you to access those. This will obviously continue to be built upon as well. So this webinar will go on that web page as we kind of develop and expand the research and learn more. We'll continue to update that with case studies and other elements that can add to it. Another major part of this was core partner briefing workshops. So as I mentioned, collaboration being key. So we want to continue to test and reevaluate the effectiveness of this research going forward. So we'll be running a number of core partner briefing workshops over the next period of time. Obviously, we're looking at developing as well a webinar series. This is the first in that series to introduce the research, and we hope to continue perhaps with further stories and in-depth stories that come out of this project. Partner activation will be a part of that as well, and that could include blogs, video case studies, or other aspects, and these will also be regularly added to our webpage and shared via social media. We did present this research at the MRS Health and Fitness Conference in May. We're going to continue to look for other opportunities to activate and disseminate the research to the wider sector as well, in order to get as much reach and engagement as possible. And then finally, we'll also be doing some media releases and engagement, including social media promotion and other factors, such as we've already had a short article written in The Voice, and we'll look to reach out to other media institutions to see if we can promote this research further. Finally for me, I'll be passing to Lorna after. Influencing policy is a key part of this, and we want to influence sector policy to apply an evidence-first and collaborative whole systems approach to understanding our target audience behaviours. For those of you who aren't familiar with this approach, it incorporates the wider environmental factors that influence an individual's opportunity to take part in physical activity and sport, including their social environment, organisations and institutions, as well as the physical environment and policy environment. There is further information on this within the report and the resources, but this research very much wants to look at that whole systems approach and fit into that and ensure we capture all aspects and all elements to be most effective. We also do want to share and engage this approach with other partners in other parts of London and England. And as such, we believe we can map these findings onto other areas of London where there are similar demographic and socioeconomic factors. So, for example, using the busy mothers segment as an example, we could look to apply that to other parts of London where there are similar makeup, socioeconomic, cultural, ethnic, etc. Factors for similar results. Additionally, we want to be able to replicate. So this methodology is designed to be replicable across other less active populations and geographies. So if we can't map particular findings onto those geographies, the approach is being tested, is being continuously developed, and we look to improve efficiencies in leading research in this way, and leading program development in this way through an evidence-first approach in order to engage the right target audiences. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're going to be continuously monitoring and evaluating the research and all our findings through a continuous review process. I'll pass on to Lorna now, who'll talk a little bit more about the implementation aspect.
Thanks, Tristan. So the implementation of this work is going to be led by London Sport in partnership with those initial agencies that set up this research. So Essex Cricket, Pulse Netball, West Ham Foundation and Leyton Orient. And together we're looking into how these resources begin to develop into support for providers of activity through those particular sports to start off with, but how from learning within those and the tools that might be developed to ensure that we are upskilling those workforces are then usable by other delivery agencies across the area. So we're kind of piloting bits and pieces with them to instigate through to that. It'll be really important for us to be able to see what are the best methods for ensuring that we can share this research, but in a way that is really practical and allows for immediate kind of changes in terms of how things are promoted, how things are talked about, connections that are made with services that are provided. There's some really useful research included within this that starts to talk to how activity is presented and awareness is raised. So that will be one of the key things that we're doing with those 4 agencies at the moment. We're also going to be looking at what we need to do to challenge some of the more sort of environmental and structural influences on women in East London. So looking into the spaces that are available to them and how we continue to develop and increase those. And we want that work to be done through co-production. So as we start to pilot new things that need to happen, we want to be able to continue to work with both the influencing organisations that have fed into this research and are really clear about the audiences that they work with and deliver to and their needs, but also with individual women to be able to shape what goes on and working with partners to help unpick how delivery really needs to shift and change within East London. And the view is that from all of these pieces of work, we'll learn things that allow us to use that not only with other sports and physical activity providers and other agencies within East London, but across London and beyond. We're also going to be looking at how we kind of test different activities and approaches. I think I need to ask someone to move me to the next slide, don't I? Thank you. And as opportunities arise like this one, we'll start to ask out to agencies to feed into it. So it's just come around really timely for this. It's an opportunity that came up yesterday, but it's looking at organisations that have an understanding of certain segmentations from the women within this research. And it's an opportunity that really fits nicely with the Busy Mothers section that we've talked about. And so Couch to Fitness, which is a product that's been developed by Our Parks, is around that at-home fitness that gets beginners into being active, fits around sort of their time schedule, fits around their commitments, but gives that confidence to engage with activity going forward. So Catch to Fitness from Our Parks, they want to develop that. They want to develop that connection between agencies like the parenting groups that we talked about, who might not have the budget to deliver their own activities, but absolutely have a role to play in promoting these opportunities to their groups, work with that group about how does this product need to develop so that it's something they'd be really confident promoting and translating. So if anyone is interested in potentially assisting Our Parks and Couch to Fitness to develop that product, my contact details are on there. Please let me know and we'll include it in the information that we send out following the session. But we're hoping that there'll be more opportunities like that as we go along, both across London and in East London, where we'll be able to say, this is what we're trying to do. This is the agency or the segment that it speaks to. And we want to work with these influencers and these partners to really develop that so that it is meaningful and useful to women in East London, rather than just coming up with something on our own and landing it within the area. So those will be really key factors for us going forward. It's our intention that we keep updating on where we're going with this project. So it won't just be lots of information as we've done this and it's finished. We'll be talking on a monthly basis about what's happening within the project, what are the key things that we're learning as we're going along, what sort of bits and pieces are we still working on, and encouraging as much engagement as we possibly can throughout. And I think I'm handing it back to Tristan.
Yes, you can hand back to me. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, everybody. I think that concludes the presentation. I hope it's been useful and helpful, and that you have a better understanding of what went on during this research, where it's come from, and where it's going, and hopefully how it can be useful to you in your work every day as well. Obviously, as Lorna mentioned, if you have any further interest, you can contact any of us via the email below. But now we'll open it up to Q&A, and you can either drop your questions in the chat, and we'll respond to them well verbally, or feel free to put up your hand, and we'll open it up to, to ask questions, or share any further thoughts. If you have any thoughts as well that you think would add value as well, please do share them.
Just to apologise.
Sorry,
Tristan, just to apologise at this point, I am going to dive off the call because I've got another one at 3 o'clock. However, I will see all the questions, and if there's something that I need to respond to when we share the presentation and bits and pieces from today, I'll absolutely answer those questions at that point as well.
Great, thank you. Well, I'll stay quiet for a bit, and hopefully some people have some interesting questions.
Tristan, would you like us to put our hand up or just fire away?
We'll go with hand up from now on, but Alison, good to see you, by the way. Please do fire away.
I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the desire for women to exercise with their children, because there's so much of a gap with creches, and to be able to provide that service. We've tried before to have some sessions, physical activity sessions, where the children are engaged as well. So family fun, whether it be yoga, so more relaxed and trying, especially if they're babies before they start crawling. And what was the feedback of that? Would they rather, is it very much about me time, or is it that they're happy for their children to be involved as well?
I think it's really crucial that it's both. I think we did hear from mothers saying that obviously, that they are really time poor, and therefore they also just want to, I think if you were sort of thinking that it's good practice to get your child involved early in physical activity, sports, what be it, but I think also partly that drive to exercise with their children partly just came from the fact that they are time poor and don't necessarily have the funds for childcare. So I think it's a bit of both there, and I think a lot of women liked the idea of exercising with their children, but certainly to be balanced out by some actual proper, where they could really get into the exercise, therefore not being held back by something which was too slow and obviously appropriate for a baby or a toddler, whatever it be as well. We heard from a lot of women or mothers specifically that they really need to they feel like they just don't get any exercise at the moment. They just don't have the time. So they need some of that bigger, hard hitting, even high intensity stuff. Whether that is actually organized the sport itself, because a lot of mothers were craving that social interaction with other women, or other parents even, just, to see some form of adult social interaction. So whether that is something a bit more sociable like a sport, or whether it is, something that relaxes them, such as yoga, but a bit more advanced just for themselves, or Pilates, whatever it is, I think I would say on balance, and anyone else feel free to weigh in here, but from what we heard in our community, I'd say on balance, mothers were really after that me time, but accepted that it would be great to be able to combine their own exercise at times with their children as well. Does that answer the question?
Yes, pretty much. Just continue doing a bit of both. Thank you.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, just adding to that, I think it's something that can be, and definitely I think will be explored a little bit further, as well as we go through the implementation and activation phase, because it's, Alison, we've had this conversation in the past actually about family activities and how challenging it can be, and how different behaviours and drivers and motivators can affect whether or not joint family participation is effective or not in given areas. So it's something that I think we'll be looking to explore a little bit further as part of that segment. I'm actually going to just respond to Dana's question quickly, and then I'm going to jump back to something similar. But Dana, just read out your question. Do you feel the findings of this report could be applicable to other locations, i.e. Manchester? Touched on that briefly in the presentation, and yes, we do think they could be applicable where we can map them directly to similar population groups. If you're looking at completely different ethnic groups, socioeconomic factors, or lifestyle behaviors, there's a number of different things that can come into play, but they're not restricted to London. They could be mapped onto other areas, but it's a case of matching up the demographics and socioeconomic factors in a similar manner. If they don't map, the approach and methodology should map and should be scalable in that sense, in order to follow that process to get the same answers. I hope that answers that question. Natalia, I know you've touched on the response to Alison, so I thought it might actually be really nice to hear from you. I haven't met you yet, but really nice to hear from you as well, because obviously you're kind of working in that space.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, on purpose, I just turned my video on. I'm here. So when I work with families in Barking and Dagenham, and the reality is that it's really hard to find activities around where they're both included. Right. So if the mother is attending, but let's say it's not for the child, like what do you do with the child? Right. So unless you offer a creche, which again, it's more complicated because you need to think about the safety issues and the policies in place and so on, the staff who will help, support that. So what we have done is really just to put them all together. So everything that we do is like parents, and it's not only mothers, it's like sometimes it's grandparents coming along as well. So extended family, parents, dads as well. So it could be, because it's just like, there's not much about that available. So it's quite unique to offer something where the whole family is invited. So it's more inclusive as well. But I agree. I know moms, including myself, we all want time for ourselves, but unfortunately it's sort of not possible. Maybe not throughout the day, maybe during the evening and, arranging other things. But yeah, we have a lot of families interested in really doing things together.
Thanks, Natalia. Has anybody else got any questions at this point?
I have kind of a quick question. I just wanted to know, where would I find the full report? I only ordered, my ticket thing today, and I don't think I can see it anywhere. I'm not sure if I've missed it, to be able to read the full report.
Yeah, I've just dropped that in the chat, so you should be able to see a link just further up in the chat stream. If you can't see that link, let me know and I'll drop it in the chat again.
Oh yeah, I've got it here. Sorry, thank you.
Should be able to access all the resources there.
Tristan, I can't work out how to put my hand up, sorry, on Zoom. I'm so used to Teams, but I've got another question, if that's okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Was there any research done or any consultation done on versus indoor and outdoor space and the usage of it and what people would prefer?
Not sort of particularly looking at that. What we did definitely find out was that if there is exercise which is able to be offered online, and this isn't only because we did the research at a time of a global pandemic, but going forwards, I think a lot of women would actually find that really helpful if they could, I suppose, inside in that case, but it's not about being inside or outside in that case, it's just doing it from home. So they don't necessarily always have to travel. It is that bit more convenient if they are time poor. You don't have the associated costs of travel, etc. So that's one of the things we looked at, and we have gotten a few of the recommendations scattered throughout the various outputs that would be really helpful if it could be facilitated either by a sports club or whatever it may be. And in terms of then other aspects where the inside-outside conversation came up, this was more than just as far as we heard, sometimes to do with preferences depending on sort of cultural or religious affiliation. So when we spoke to the Muslim Sports Foundation, for example, they were saying that in their experience, that there are just some women who might not feel comfortable exercising outside and therefore prefer an inside space just to make them feel a bit more less self-conscious or just more comfortable, amongst women, etc. That's as far as we really got with that conversation. But yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. Apart from that, I don't think there were no specific preferences came out on a general level in terms of inside versus outside, I don't think.
Great, thank you.
Emma, I'll come to you in a second. Carmen, I see, has asked a question, a really interesting question, which is about how relevant the work is and how we might be able to apply findings to their particular situation, which is where women are referred through organisations such as domestic violence charities, hostels, homelessness services, etc. And obviously, this, just to mention, obviously the research is specific. It's a little bit of a tricky question to answer, because in some cases it may be applicable and it may be something that could be used in this sense through kind of the customer journey mapping. But obviously the women that were in the way they were segmented and the way they were selected are quite particular to specific, obviously, ethnic and cultural groups, socioeconomic factors, location, and if they don't map directly, if there are other multiple challenging factors that relate to their behaviours, their circumstances, their lifestyle, it would only map to, I think, to a certain point before those considerations would probably need to take the forefront and to be looked at in further detail. It's a really interesting question, and obviously something that we'd be, I'd love to follow up. If you do want to drop me an email, or Sanya and Laura Jane and Lorna, maybe we can actually have a discussion about that, because it's something to consider going forward for us. Emma, shall I go on to you now?
Hi. Yeah, I'm actually a campaigner with the kind of Walking Everyday charity, London Living Streets and Living Streets. And we're looking at everyday walking and how exercise you can build into everyday routines. And we just developed a walking network for central London, and now developing it in Hackney and Islington, and doing a bit of work with the Sport England project actually out in Hackney. And I guess I'm just, first of all, interested in whether you were looking at building exercise into daily routines, walking to the shops sort of thing. And also how useful you think tools like maps or online networks or tools like that could be kind of in prompting behaviour change in that way.
Okay, yeah, no, really interesting. So absolutely, just because we understood from the get-go that, if you just say to people sport, that could in itself already be quite daunting. We absolutely did. And when we spoke to women about, exercise, I suppose, we framed it as physical activity. This does involve any, parts of when you're even just, as you say, walking to the shops. If it's more than 10 minutes a day, that might start to build up into something. So absolutely, we were looking at that kind of frame. And yes, so absolutely, many women were actually, just to say, aware of this. So a lot of people were saying to us, I did actually used to get a solid hour of walking in a day, and I've now lost that due to the pandemic. So it's very much still at the forefront of their minds that this kind of everyday activity is really important. So I'd say that's already kind of, a really good response, that people are just really aware of having to build this in on an everyday sort of, schedule. And then in terms of, did you say maps and sort of online?
Yeah, so we produce the paper mapper, which has got some use to some people, but we're also looking at online digital mapping. It's just a way, the maps are useful navigation tools, but they're also kind of tools for just getting people thinking differently about distances and how far to go as well. So I don't know whether, and influencers, I guess I was interested in different influencers and how they could use these sort of tools to promote that as well.
Oh yeah, no.
Sorry, go ahead, Laura Jane.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll just quickly on that would say that I think the maps could be really interesting, just to give women some ideas, some inspiration, because it really does depend. Some people might live close to a park and therefore they're quite set. They know that they can go there. Other women, we did hear that they said, I live quite far away from these kinds of places, and there are certain bits I might want to avoid, But in sort of, first of all, we had a lot of suggestions from women saying that if you had sort of groups, like walking groups, loads of people really up for that, just to address that sort of safety aspect. And then if you then also add into that, actually setting them a route and things like that, I do think that could really create some uptake and some inspiration from that sense, because a lot of women were interested in that more, less high impact, but potentially more meeting people, approaching exercise from that point of view. So I think that could definitely be really interesting. And then obviously it'd be to discuss how other influencers might use that.
I might just add a bit to that, Emma, because I have a background in spatial analysis and mapping, and it's just something that I really like doing and I find really useful. I've done quite a bit of it around London. I got to say that the primary function of for example, mapping is usually, in developing mapping tools is usually and is most effective in a B2B environment. So supporting planners and deliverers and potentially in this case could be influencers, but those who are organizing and planning events, etc., or activities. And when it comes to the particular, the individual participants, they're, and this is again, a little bit of a subjective view, but they're only as useful as far as they kind of build into their existing lifestyle factors, and where it is part of their behavior and how they might look to approach a scenario. So if they were, interested in for example, if they used existing mapping tools with with other parts of their lifestyle, they may be willing to engage in that. But it can be quite specific to particular age groups and those other factors. So again, unless it is something that builds on existing work. So for example, embedding a map within a web page when you're talking about a project or an activity would be extremely helpful. But if it's there as the primary function, the mapping tool allows them to explore and find activities, it becomes less effective. So it would be very much an add-on, is how I would kind of recommend use for participant engagement.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thanks. I'll hopefully get in contact. Thanks.
Thank you. Matt, I think you had a question.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Great, thanks. First of all, just want to say that was such a great presentation, really, really insightful, and yeah, so many reflections and things to take away. So I just wanted to thank everyone for that. It was great. One of the best I've been to in a while. I guess what I wanted to say was, so I'm Director of Sport at University of East London. We've got a hugely diverse student body. So 70% are Black or ethnic minority. We've got over 50% of our students are female. And I guess what I wanted to say was that there were, and there are lots of opportunities for collaboration. And we'd be very interested in trying to, and we have historically had a huge challenge in terms of trying to engage our wider student population. And we would certainly welcome the opportunity to work with any organisation that's here today, or any others that London Sport might have connections with. We have a large student workforce. We're a careers-focused university. We have opportunities for research, impact research, and there just seems like a lot of opportunity and a lot of common ground everyone wants to cover, and we'd certainly welcome any offers to try and take some of these lessons that you've learned through this research and try and apply it in a university environment, because the university cohort reflects the local community. So yeah, that was it really. But we've done some work in the past with all the sporting club partners that are attached to research, and we're keen to do more, but also keen to work with other organisations that might need space, might want to work on funding bids collectively to drive participation in this area. So yeah, that was it really. Just a bit of a pitch, I suppose. I hijacked the presentation a little bit, but yeah, just wanted to put that out there and make sure everyone knew who we were and what we're about. And I can share my contact details in the chat if needed.
Thanks for that, Matt. I know it's actually really useful, because it's one of the core parts of this research is collaboration, and the more people involved, we wanted to look at getting as many people involved as possible, not only in implementation but in other opportunities as well. So thank you for that. I think what might be really helpful is to please do share contact details in the chat, with each other, but also perhaps I'll drop Lorna's email again in the chat, and it might be useful if you are interested in exploring kind of collaborative opportunities, whether it is around research or funding or other factors. Just email into Lorna and mention that, and she can coordinate a response and an approach to that. So I think that's probably the best we can do at this point, but I think it's ties in so well with what we want to do going forward. So thanks for raising that. Have we got any more questions at this point? Bridget, you've still got your hand up. Have you got a question?
Yeah, it was more kind of, I'm here attending really with Triple Double. We're a creative agency that specialises in sports work, but I also run a mum swimming community called Mama Swim. And I think I just wanted, listening and like looking at all the research definitely resonated with me. But I do feel like a lot of mums feel like they can't say that they want to spend time exercising away from their kids. The kind of the community that we have, most definitely, it's all about trying to swim without your kids. I mean, swimming is one of the sports that you really just can't do with kids on the side. You know, you do need to have your child looked after by someone else while you're doing some lengths in the swimming pool, and there's just not the facilities to do that in London, and people, young mothers in London don't tend to have grandparents around to help look after kids. So that's the kind of the real struggle that we find as a community, that actually it's near on impossible unless we take it in turns to look after each other's kids on the side of a Lido, or what we're doing currently, which is set up a Sunday group where we meet every Sunday and the dads look after the kids. That it's just one of those sports that's very, very difficult to do as a mother. So I know that yoga, and there's lots of sports that most definitely you can get your kids involved in, but I guess I just wanted to flag that swimming is one of the sports that's kind of the best for your body as a new mum, but perhaps the hardest to do as a new mum as well.
Great, thank you. Where did you say you were based?
We're based, well, in Walthamstow, but we swim at the West Reservoir, which is in Stoke Newington. So yeah, East London. Okay,
great, thank you. It might be worth you dropping Lorna a line as well. You know, the more kind of programs we're aware of as well in that area, the more we can do, I think, would be really helpful.
Certainly, will do, certainly. Thanks.
Thanks. So I won't leave any awkward silences and everybody waiting. I guess last chance now for any questions or any thoughts or anything you might want to share before we wrap it up. That's a good question from Cara. I don't know whether you might have any thoughts on that, Laura Jane or Sanya, or should I pick it up? I can pick it up.
Yeah, go for it. And then if I've got anything to add, I'll jump in.
Yeah, we'll jump in.
Yeah, great. Yeah, no, I definitely really good point, and aware that there are limitations to the research in the age groupings that we captured, in the population groupings we captured, and obviously it focused on over 16 plus women and girls, but it's yes, it's a really good point. I think it's something that we're not only looking at kind of younger girls, but younger children in general, so children, young people, through our CYP team at London Sport, but we haven't previously applied any kind of segmentation yet to that younger age category. Definitely something to consider, whether or not it would fit into this particular style of research or approach. It's not something I can answer now, but again, it's definitely worth a conversation, and if it is something that you're doing or are interested in doing, please do get in touch.
And I'll just, if I could, I think particularly some of the diverse populations we're looking at generationally over time, fitness activities are becoming more of the norm. So it's kind of like people know now, okay, yeah, there's a lot of awareness, they seem to want to take part, but again, like we've said, then facing some of the barriers to others. So perhaps, yeah, if we could reach them at even an earlier stage, just with everyone really, and ingrain it into people's day-to-day habits. I studied a lot in the States and studied kind of sports system there, and it is very much ingrained, whereas here I think it's still a bit iffy at points. So I think certainly for any group, but particularly ours, it would be great for kind of these sorts of less active populations.
Great. Okay. if that's it, please interrupt me if you do have a question. But if that's it, thank you again for coming. Really interesting discussions and questions at the end, and actually a lot of things for us to think about on our end. I've dropped Lorna's email address into the chat. I can send around an email at the end of the webinar. Obviously, will be available. We'll likely edit and cut, a part of this discussion out, but the webinar will be available on the webpage, which I've also dropped into the chat. If you have any particular questions, want to get in touch with any of us, please do. But otherwise, we'll send around a follow up after, and you can continue the conversation and see how we can move things forward as well. Great, thank you, Sanya. Thank you, Laura Jane. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.